Bertrum Piedmont, or Bertie as he likes to be called, was the famous architect of Bendy Land appointed by Joey Drew. While Bertram seemed to have some kind of relationship issues with Joey, he seemed so mad about it that he ended up attacking Henry in Chapter 4. But why is this? To find out, we need to understand a little more about Bertram as a character, and considering that Chapter 4 was relatively quick, we are going to have to dig deeper. So, let's get into it. The first thing that we notice about Bertram is he sees himself as the consummate professional. For 40 years, he worked hard to build a legacy of colossal wonders that breach the imagination. With a history of sweat invested into his craft, it would make sense that he partnered up with someone as ambitious and wildly successful as Joey Drew, if only he knew what was to come. In Bertram's audio tape in Chapter 4, he mentions that Joey Drew addresses him as Bertie in front of high-key investors of Bendy Land, their joint project. Yes, Joey Drew used the name Bertie, a pet name used for such an esteemed individual as Bertrum Piedmont, with a big ego to boot, as if he were a child. It makes sense that he would be furious by this. Of course, instead of talking it out with Joey Drew, he decides to outdo his expectations and take all of the glory for it. Which is pretty scary. How was Bertie planning to make it clear that his grand achievement was his and his alone? This is where things get even more complicated. Let's take a listen to what Bertram tells us before going completely haywire.
The biggest park ever built. A centerfold of attractions. Each one more grand than the one before it. It makes my eyes come to tears at the thought. But then, oh, Mr. Drew, for all your talk of dreams, you are the true architect behind so many nightmares. I built this park. It was to be a masterpiece, my masterpiece. And now you think you can just throw me out? Trample me to the dust and forget me? No! This is my park, my glory. You may think I'm wrong, but I'm still here!
This gives us some terribly conflicting information. In his first audio tape, Bertram sounds like the villain, someone who would overthrow Joey Drew at some point to make sure people knew that he, and he alone, built Bendy Land. On the other hand, what he tells us before his boss fight paints Joey Drew to be the villain, as if Joey had planned for Bertram to be left in the dust all along. Looking back at the tapes we get for the other workers, a similar pain is shared among them, with Joey Drew as the one bringing them sadness or simply taking things away from them. Joey's audio tape in Chapter 4 reveals that he truly hates the overly positive messages that he's spouting, and the tape in Chapter 3 reveals that he thinks people expect a free ride to success. To me, it seems that this is just more evidence for Joey manipulating everyone and tossing them to the side more than anything. Just like the other major workers, an aspect of Joey Drew's dreams torments Bertram and causes him to hate Joey. So now that we know all of this, why in the world does he go after Henry? Given what we've discussed so far, he must think that Henry is Joey Drew's twin brother, or that Henry is Joey Drew, right? Nope. I really just think that Bertram is sharing his views on Joey because of how he was written into the story. I've gotta be real with you. When I first heard Bertrum Piedmont's voice and read his name, my first thought was, what the heck? A new character in Chapter 4 of a 5-chapter game? And the other day, someone finally shared similar feelings on this in a comment. See, a story doesn't usually add in new characters so late into the narrative to keep the story clean and more focused on the challenges ahead. Since Bendy and the Ink Machine was well past the midway point when Bertram made an appearance, it threw the machine of the story, so to speak, completely out of whack. Who the heck is this, and why should I care about him? Why does Bertram matter after everything we've been through at the studio now? Since this is an indie game, there's probably an attempt here at breaking the conventions of storytelling, and that's okay. That just means that Bertram's arc of the story has to be told very quickly, so we can actually care about him. And considering that chapter 4 was pretty quick compared to the previous chapters, we have limited time to understand what he's all about. See where I'm getting at here? The reason why we get these long dialogues from Bertram is so that we can understand his character and backstory as quickly as possible. Since he is a brand new character, there really was no way around this. That is why I think he was addressing Joey Drew before his fight with Henry, to make his relationship with Joey as clear as possible. His face hole was closed while he was speaking and everything, so how could he possibly know who it was out there at all? I really just think that this fight was a way for us to better understand that Joey saw him as disposable, or at least he thought that way, rather than him being out for revenge for being called Bertie, like we learned earlier in the chapter. Maybe this is in the game for both reasons. After all, there is a pattern amongst the workers hating their employer, but at the same time, they seem to have something against him, or at least a plot that suggests so. We can see this especially with characters like Susie Campbell, Sammy Lawrence, Norman Polk, and Thomas Connor. They tend to show that they are displeased with Joey Drew, or have some plots to get back at him. On the other hand, we see this to be a little bit less so with characters like Grant Cohen and Wally Franks. That is, of course, unless you count the insane writing with the audio tape in his office at the beginning of chapter 4, and Wally constantly saying, "I'm out of here." I just find it interesting that despite how Joey Drew is presented as such an evil, life-sucking villain to nearly every character involved in Bendy and the Ink Machine, there is a sliver of a chance that he actually wanted the best for everyone. Now this might be a stretch, but everything we've talked about so far so clearly makes Joey out to be the bad guy that it subconsciously hides another story. One where Joey Drew really did want the best for his employees, to the point where he made tough decisions about staffing and the budget of the studio. He installed a vast and complex ink pipe network to fuel the ink machine, and realized that it was inhibiting some workers. In response, he employed technicians to fix the leaky ink pipes, and installed even more expensive equipment to make sure Sammy and the others in the music department would be able to work properly. Joey Drew didn't fire Susie Campbell, he just replaced her as the voice of Alice Angel, yet she treated it like the end of the world. Norman Polk is a little more mysterious, being disturbed by the happenings of the studio without giving reasons why, and instead he decided to hide in the shadows like a bit of a creep. Okay, more like a lot like a creep. Whether he knew it would happen or not, Joey Drew massively upset his staff, causing them to mutiny and plot against his success. Can we really blame him for returning the favor and treating them like fodder for his obsessive dreams? Just some food for thought. As for Bertram's presence in chapter 4, it was really chilling to realize that he was speaking from the carousel rather than the audio tape. It's just so sad to find out that Bertram is yet another tragic victim of the Ligma epidemic. Just kidding, but everything that we've covered so far does leave us with a bit of an unsettling revelation. Bertram attacks Henry and is one of the most epic and fun boss fights in the game to serve as a huge obstacle to Henry during a tense time. It makes the journey to save Boris more satisfying, and if you haven't saved Boris yet, well, yeah. But how about this? Considering all the malice between Joey Drew and Bertie, as well as the fact that Joey Drew ends up being pretty darn evil, Bertram may have thought that Joey Drew found out he fused himself with a machine and sent Henry to dispose of him. Regardless of it actually being the case, that kind of accidentally happened if you consider the letter from chapter 1. It also justifies Lacey Benton's audio tape, which reveals to us that Bertram was working on animatronic Bendies, so he had some kind of technical mechanical knowledge as well as being a world-renowned architect. Throw in the fact that the state of Joey Drew's studio allowed 3D cartoons to spawn all over the place, it doesn't seem too nuts that whatever caused all of this might have also had a hand in fusing Bertram with one of his grand rides. Then again, maybe Bertram was just a pioneer in fusing souls with machines that seemed to be popular for horror games set in the 20th century. Or maybe he was just hiding away until he could strike back. Perhaps it even has to do with the whereabouts of Wally Franks. Tap this video to find out more about that, or check out these videos which were picked just for you. Remember to get your Ligma vaccination. See ya!